flame where the sparks ignite. Dreams take flight in the amber light. A circle of minds, a fire of thought, building some from what we've got. Grab a log, throw it on. The night is young. The night is young. Welcome to the inventive fireside, where wisdom burns and hopes collide. Pull up a chair, let's fan the flame. Together we'll light up the game. The crackling wood, it tells a tale. Lessons learned in ships that sail. Experts speak and the sparks cascade. Fueling dreams that will never fade. Bring your spark, your ember bright. Let's stoke the blaze through the endless night. Inventive fireside, where wisdom burns and hopes collide. Pull up a chair, let's fan the flame. Together we'll light up the game. Hey, hey. Mike. Round the flame where the sparks ignite. Dreams take flight in the amber light. A circle of minds, a fire of thought, building some from what we've got. Grab a log, throw it on. The night is young. The night is young. Welcome to the inventive fireside, where wisdom burns and hopes collide. Pull up a chair, let's fan the flame. Together we'll light up the game. The crackling wood, it tells a tale. Lessons learned in ships that sail. Experts speak and the sparks cascade. Fueling dreams that will never fade. Bring your spark, your ember bright. Let's stoke the blaze through the endless night. Inventive fireside, where wisdom burns and hopes collide. Pull up a chair, let's fan the flame. Together we'll light up the game. Hey, hey. Mike.
All right, welcome everybody to another inventive fireside. So excited to have everybody on, and looking forward to another great opportunity to learn a lot of great wisdom to help you both. I always love it because I get to learn things to help me with my business, and hopefully help everybody that's in attendance along their journey as well. And so let's go ahead and dive in. A couple quick reminders to the audience. One is always welcome your input, either questions during the webinar itself and or after the fact. So you're always welcome to throw it up there, and we'll usually try and still keep an eye on things or respond or connect you with the guest. But if you do want to comment or throw up a question or anything else during the webinar, just do that on the LinkedIn side. Just throw a comment on the webinar. I'll keep an eye on those, and otherwise make sure to relay that. And the other thing is so we do have about once a week, we try and do it about every Friday. Sometimes we're hit or miss every once in a while, but about every Friday we'll have a different inventive fireside. We'll be able to hear from different bonfire presenters, get some different expertise, and continue to learn things and to utilize it within the business that you're growing to expand on that. So without further ado, and after those couple reminders, we'll jump right in. So today we're going to have our bonfire presenter that's going to be talking a lot about the legal dues before that you launch a business. So, what should you be doing? What should you be thinking about? Kind of what are those, 5 essential legal steps that everybody should be taking, and what are kind of that practical nature of which you approach, which I think is certainly not necessarily always a fun or exciting side. Nobody loves dealing. other than attorneys typically don't love dealing with the legal side, but it is always better to have that in place and always make sure that you have that taken care of so that you can then focus on the fun side of the business, which is building and growing the business. So without any further ado, I welcome on to our next bonfire presenter, Jacob Dean.
Thanks, Devin. Happy to be here and excited to talk for a few minutes. Like you said, maybe for some people, not the most interesting topic in the world, but I find it interesting and I think it's an important one. So I'm going to share my screen here, see if we can do this successfully. And then let's see. Okay, let's see. All right. Can you all see that? Devin, you're my. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So, as Devin mentioned, my name is Jacob Dean. I'm an attorney coming up on about 15 years of experience. I've worked for a number of different firms. I've worked in-house and then in March went out on my own. I have offices in Idaho and Ohio and Utah, but I also do some federal tax work that kind of takes me wherever. So, kind of bounced around, seen a lot, done a lot. And so this is, kind of my list of things that came to mind when Devin and I were discussing this topic and, what people can do and kind of drawing on my experience. So we'll dive right in. So the first thing, as you're starting a business or thinking about starting a business is thinking about the legal structure, right? And this is a really, again, not just because I'm a lawyer, but kind of interesting topic for me, just in my conversations with clients or potential clients, right? Of people have, well, my neighbors set up an S-Corp, and my person who does my hair said that I need to do an LLC, and this person says I don't need any entity, right? Like I can, my yoga instructor, they don't have anything set up. So even though it's kind of in this legal advice, it's something that, I found that everybody kind of gets different opinions on. And I use the word appropriate rather than the word right for a reason, because I think I didn't want to like kind of convey that there's a one size fits all approach. I think there's a lot kind of in that second bullet where talk about factors to consider depending on what kind of liability exposure you may have, taxation, how many owners you have, how you're thinking about growing, industry regulations. Like there's a lot of, I think, more variables that come into play than people think. Um, but there's lots of different forms. I would say LLCs are kind of the most common form for somebody looking to start a business and have a business structure. But that's by no means the only option, right? You can be a sole proprietorship. We still have partnerships. We have corporations, and there's different permutations of kind of all of those things. And again, with the factors to consider of why you would or wouldn't want to choose one of those. So I think just kind of approaching this first step from a place of who am I? What are my goals? Again, going to those factors to consider and then going out from there. And I think another kind of important thing to recognize that that is not to add more levels of complication, but you have kind of your legal structure from like a state standpoint. So let's use an LLC for an example. You file your articles of formation or organization with your state to form an LLC, but then how is it taxed for federal income tax purposes? So, for example, an S corporation isn't a legal entity, it's a tax classification, right? And there can be overlay. There's different types of legal entities that can be taxed as S corporations if you have that election. An LLC could be taxed as a pass-through, it can be taxed as a partnership. So it gets, again, this is high level overview, 15, 20 minutes. So we can't get into all of it, but there's a lot of kind of tension with these parts that I think sometimes people don't appreciate kind of upfront of, not just the legal entity and the structure, but how that is impacted from kind of a federal tax standpoint. and other implications. And so, one of the reasons that this is kind of top of list for me is I think, conceptually it kind of comes first, right, as you're planning. But really everything else you do kind of follows from there. And, one of, I guess, the big takeaways for me, if you're thinking about starting a business that's has any sort of formal legal structure, right, is the key is just to treat it separately, right? There's this concept in the law called piercing the corporate veil or piercing the veil, where if you set up an entity to protect yourself and, give you some liability shield, but you don't follow through with kind of any of the formalities of treating it as a separate entity with existence, right? You're not getting the benefits of it. So, it's both the recognize and choosing that right structure, but also then kind of following through with implementing that structure. And I also noted there at the bottom that, it's easier to kind of get things set up correctly from the outset, but it is not impossible to change. So there is such a thing as an entity conversion. So if you are listening and you're like, oh my gosh, the light bulb goes off. I shouldn't have done X. I should have done Y. There are ways to pivot. You can also merge old entities into new. You can dissolve entities, set up new ones. You can convert them. So there is opportunities kind of after the fact to make some tweaks and changes if you get down the road and realize maybe you don't have the right structure. It's just easier to kind of do that at the outset. So that was number one. And kind of building off of number one is number two on my list, which is to take care of the initial filings and documents. And as I was making this list, and every time I do this for a client, it's kind of surprising. Oh yeah, and I need to do that, and I need to do that, and I need to do that. So, um, kind of this first tranche of what I describe as essential kind of initial filings. I have the register the name. So this is just to kind of highlight you can, if you're not quite there yet with like ready to form an entity, in most states you can reserve the name. So if you're saying, hey, I'm going to have, widget factory LLC, but I'm not quite ready to launch, but I'm afraid somebody else is going to take my name, you can reserve the name or kind of claim that name in a lot of states. Obviously, if you're going to have any sort of legal structure filing those documents, whether it's LLC, corporation, obtaining an EIN, which is an employee identification number, which is unique to that entity for federal tax purposes. You have employment things to think about. So if you have if you don't have employees, a lot of this can wait. But if you have employees, things like I-9s, different, compliance issues of, hey, how do I get people onboarded correctly? And then a lot of states, again, depending on the business, like if you're doing retail sales, you will need to register to, collect and remit sales tax, things like that. So again, we're blowing through these super quickly just given the time, but that's just kind of the initial piece. Then, depending on what industry you're in, there might be specific licenses or permits that you need. For example, if you're running a nursing home, right? And you form the entity, but then under various federal or state regulation, right, to provide those health services, right, you may need a different license. And then sometimes there's also local permits that people overlook, either on a state or a local, like municipality level. An business operating license. They're usually pretty cheap and pretty generic, but something people can overlook. And then, we have the foundational governance documents for the entity. Again, if it's just you as an individual, not not as much of a concern, or a single member LLC, meaning an LLC with one owner, probably not as relevant. But anytime you have a partnership or a corporation with multiple shareholders, you're really going to want to dig into these documents, which really outline like how the organization is going to run, how it's going to be governed. And my personal recommendation is to avoid any sort of 50-50 partnership. I mean, that's not like a strictly legal stance. That's just from my practical experience. I've seen more 50-50 partnerships go bad I than I can even count. So my personal recommendation is to have somebody be in charge, 51-49, whatever the split is. Again, that's not because there's legal risk necessarily to 50-50, but my practical experience is when everybody thinks we're kind of equally in charge, down the road, things can get hard. And if you do want to do it, just really thinking hard about those operational documents and what they say, and contemplating like, hey, what if something changes in this relationship? What do we want that to look like down the road? How can we adjust? So, and really at the end of the day, this gives you credibility, having all this stuff kind of lined up, not just with outside people you'll need to deal with, whether it's banks or investors, clients, whomever. But a big portion of it, from my point of view, is just trying to save headaches down the road. If you can get a lot of this done and done right up front, you're gonna save that pain down the road. So the third thing that I had on my list is to obtain adequate insurance. So one of the reasons people form separate legal entities when they're starting a business is for that liability protection I talked about. So LLC, for example, limited liability company. The idea is, hey, if something happens in my business, I want the risk to be contained here. I don't want my personal assets to be at risk or other businesses I have. But really, from a risk mitigation standpoint, we as lawyers say, yes, legal entities are great. And don't forget about insurance and kind of vice versa. They really work hand in glove to help protect people. And again, as I was making this list, is like, oh yeah, there's a lot of different kinds of insurance to think about. So general liability, professional liability. So as an attorney, like malpractice type insurance, or if you're a healthcare worker or an accountant, right? Errors and omissions, that type of liability. You'll have workers' compensation, property coverage. D&O is directors and officers. So a lot of times people overlook this, but especially if you have, as the company grows and you have a board and they're making decisions, it's a layer of insurance that can protect the decisions made by those directors and officers of the company. And then, cyber insurance, I think, is becoming more and more important and prevalent to protect against risk from phishing, ransomware, cyber attack, all of those things, because it can both account for like business interruption that occurs, but also, out-of-pocket expenses, some of the reputational harm that can happen trying to get up to speed. So there's a lot there. And the next point is that this is going to look a little different depending on your industry, right? So if I'm online only doing marketing, right, I might be more concerned with the cyber insurance and making sure that's buttoned up. If I have a retail location, I'm going to make sure, my general liability, my property insurance is super buttoned up. If somebody, slips and falls on the premises, that I have coverage to take care of that. So, there's a lot of kind of generality, but then there's also just noting that depending on your industry, there's going to be some specificity to it. And really, in addition to the risk, you know, coverage that you're going to get, having insurance, I think, can provide peace of mind. And the last point here, the risk of loss that you cannot bear. I started my career at Procter and Gamble, which is a big, multinational corporation, Fortune 100, and I worked in the tax department and we reported up to the CFO. And I remember sitting in a meeting with the CFO, and he was talking about the company's approach to insurance and how that had changed over the years. but he just said, my basic approach to insurance is like you need insurance where there's a risk of loss that you can't bear. If you can bear the risk of loss, then you don't need the insurance, right? And so that's really kind of stuck with me in what I use personally and, pass along to clients to think about, right? Think about different scenarios and what happens, right? And if you're okay with it, kind of, self-insuring, if A, B, or C happens, I'm okay. And you want to pay, willing to pay out of pocket, then maybe you don't need insurance. But if you think about a different fact pattern and like, oh yeah, if we got hacked and somebody demanded a $3 million ransom, I'm not going to be able to take care of that myself. Like I want insurance to help me navigate through that. So it's just a little piece of advice that's stuck with me for a lot of years. So the last, oh, sorry, not last, almost last, the fourth thing here, and this kind of, as you can see, to me, builds and ties together. So we talked about the legal structure, right, and getting, everything filed that you need, getting the insurance in place, and this really builds off of that in terms of the structure and processes for record keeping. So, financially is a big one where people can fall behind. Bookkeeping is really foundational for your new business. So, whether it's you or you hire a part-time bookkeeper, you have an accountant you work with, I think this is something that is, again, very foundational, very easy to fall behind. And literally, this is just, hey, the dollar's coming in, the dollar's going out, making sure they're tracked, they're in the right buckets, I know where they are. And that ties into like taxes and receipts, right? I've got the right receipts and documentation for things. Because what that does, so if you use QuickBooks, for example, which is, one of the most common kind of bookkeeping systems, is that can help to build out your financial statements. So you have your income statement or your balance sheet, which show the financial health of your business. And I think people often overlook this because they don't yet understand why they're going to need it. But that bookkeeping can feed into financial statements, which if you go to the bank and you want to get a loan, they're going to want to see. Or you're doing really well down the road and you're looking to sell your company, guess what? The buyer's going to want to see those financial statements. So, trying not to play catch up is really good if you can get that in front on the front end. And this applies to other things too, contracts, minutes, insurance coverage, just keeping all of this organized and again, kind of tying into the data security too. One of the things that I would definitely recommend is, especially if you have employees, is doing some training on, risk associated with cybersecurity and where risk exposure is. So now to the final one, and this is kind of overarching, but just the thing that I recommend to people, I say all the time is like, hey, whether you use me or you use somebody else, that's fine. But use somebody, right? Like have somebody that can help you navigate through some of this stuff. And honestly, again, depending on the size, the scope, the sophistication of the business, this is going to vary a little bit. But, in addition to attorneys, having or knowing an accountant, bankers, financial advisors, insurance brokers, real estate brokers, like all these other professionals are really going to help you. And so for me, kind of building out that team isn't necessarily that you have to be paying all of these people actively all the time, but developing those relationships, having them in place to be able to turn to them when you need them. And kind of that second point there about having a quarterback, one thing to think about is if that's overwhelming to you to think about all of that. Some businesses and clients I have will have me be their point person. They'll have their accountant be their point person. They'll have their financial advisor. One of the advisors who's kind of helping to facilitate the others, just to shift some of that off, a business owner's plate. And I think being proactive in this area can really help avoid some costly mistakes down the road. And like I said, I tell clients all the time, whether it's me, whether it's somebody else, fine. Just find somebody, use somebody to help you kind of navigate through And then the final point here is, don't discount the benefits of informal mentors as well. I think you've got your advisors who can help you, like from a legal structural standpoint, but other people who've started businesses, run businesses, can help connect you with the right people and resources, and think about things to avoid, and kind of issues that they've dealt with. So that's super quick, but that's kind of my top five things to think about.
Awesome. No, definitely a great walkthrough and a lot of good information there. And so I'm excited. Now I'm gonna just get dive right into the fireside one-on-one
Okay.
chat with maybe a couple follow-up questions. And I'm
Sure.
sure this hits, I would say this question hits attorneys kind of across the board. I get it in my practice. I'm sure you do as well. Which is, hey, what do you think about this X, Y, and Z tool? Usually, as an example, business formations is LegalZoom, and there's a few others. I think there's Better Legal, LegalZoom. I think Rocket Lawyer offers it, and a few of them, which are, in other words, they're DIY platforms. And
Right.
there's an inherent tension. One is, well, you're asking an attorney if you think that
Mhm.
a simple platform can replace them, and so there's a bias that you're going to say, you have the inherent no, it can. But
Right.
this whether or not as attorneys we want to acknowledge it, it's still out there. People still use it, and motivation is usually, especially if you don't have a very big budget, you're just getting started, you're bootstrapping or
Right.
otherwise looking to get something in place. You go to those platforms because they're usually less expensive. So, you know, thoughts on that? Is it something that is there circumstances where people can use it, or should they just always stay away from it, or
Mhm.
sometimes it's okay, or things to watch
Yeah.
out for, that kind of thing?
Right. I mean, I don't usually see the circumstances where it works out, right? I see the circumstances where it doesn't, because people come to me and say, "Hey, I tried to do this on my own, and then, this happened," right? So I don't want to say it can never work, or, it can never function. I think the challenge that I have with it is going back to kind of my first slide, and there's so many considerations to think about with like a structure, right? In terms of both from a state standpoint of like, should I file an LLC? Should I form an LLC? What type of entity should I form? And the tax classification. And so what I see, I think filing articles of organization for an LLC, LegalZoom could probably do that fine, right? Like that's pretty straightforward, candidly. But the thing is that they don't have, right, is people have to kind of independently make the determination of what they need and want. And so that's kind of the disconnect for me, is the value I provide or other attorneys provide is like deciding what type of entity you need and getting it structured correctly versus just filing the form. I think just filing the form, those services could probably help, but it kind of skips the step of the planning and what we need. And just for example, like I've had, I don't know, two or three clients in the last few months, or people that have called me that have formed an entity, and then they made the election with the IRS to get their EIN, and they said they were going to be a partnership, but then they filed their taxes on a Schedule C, which isn't a partner, and um, again, then they come to me to clean it up later. So,
Now, let
like
me
I don't
a
want to say it
fault.
could never work, but I think if you're only thinking about, oh, all it is filing a piece of paper, you're missing the value of having guidance on getting the structure in place.
Yeah, and probably my follow-up to that is my opinion is almost across the board with a lot of these things. If you only have the budget to do LegalZoom, and it's a binary choice, I either do nothing at all
Right.
versus I use LegalZoom, I would still tell them to use a LegalZoom platform because having
Right.
something in place is better than not. But
Sure.
I
Sure.
think that you should give an adequate weight as you hit on that. Hey, there's a large degree of limitation and an inherency that you may not get it done properly. You're going to be fixing things if you can by not and appreciating a lot of the nuances that go into that. So I think
Right.
that makes sense. Now, switching, gears just to another question that often comes up, which is kind of a little bit of the flip side, but it's, if you're to look at it and, as you'd hit on, what a major intent is to shield you from personal liability. So in other words, saying, hey, if I'm starting a business, somebody comes along and sues me, or I have a product that hurts somebody, or whatever the thing that goes wrong that causes you to have to examine it, you're saying, okay, at least they're not going to come take my house or my car or my life savings. I'm not putting all of my life in jeopardy to go start a business. And yet at the same time, you listen to attorney and they say, here's all the things that can go wrong. They can pierce the corporate veil, or you set it up incorrectly, or blah, blah, blah. And so then it kind of inherently makes it so you're worried that, well, at that point, what does it matter? In other words, why should I bother to set it up if there's all of these loopholes or things that can't, that I'm going to miss out on anyway? Then why should I bother to set it up, and why not just simply, forego setting that up and simply do it as an individual, or do it without having to incur that additional expense and focus my money somewhere else. And so do you have any thoughts or insights as to how do you, or how many of the errors or things that can go wrong do go wrong, and what is the likelihood of them going wrong? Or these things that are catastrophic, meaning you lose all of your coverage or to some of your coverage, or I know that's like a loaded question with like 30 different what if, but I think the
Yeah,
inherent thing
yeah,
is if it's going to go wrong anyway and I have zero coverage, is it worth getting, or
yeah,
are
yeah.
these attorneys that just are trying to lay out every possible thing that could go wrong?
Right. So yeah, what a lot of different ideas came to mind as you continued to talk, but a few thoughts is one, back to my first slide, I think if you respect the structure, right, the LLC, the corporation, you actually run your business through it, you should have protection, right? I'm not saying it's 100% whatever, but I would say, the example of like piercing, that's the exception rather than the rule. But especially if you're running, kind of running it and you have the structure in place. If you set up an LLC and you kind of set it on the shelf and you're signing contracts in your personal name and you're running everything through your personal bank account, right? Then a judge might be like, well, yeah, that it's not really separate, right? But if you respect the structure and use it, it should provide you that protection. We talked about insurance. Again, to me, that's an additional layer of protection. So putting those two things together, you hopefully, um, between the two of them, cover some gaps that there might be in the other one. One of the other things too is, well, so for personally, right, I think it's helpful to have the separate structure and to treat my business as separate, right? Here's my business bank account, my business credit card, my business office. I buy this here just to keep everything separate for me is just functionally easier too, right? I have in my mind, like, here's my firm, it's an LLC, right? It bought this, it bought that. This is what it owns. These are its receipts. So there's some, I think, kind of psychological benefits, but the final thing I would say too, and if you're running a small business, consulting to make a living might not come in play. But if you're trying to grow or scale anything that you're looking to sell, people aren't going to want to buy, oh, well, this is just my personal business and it's all commingled, right? They're going to want to see like this is a real business with real operations, real books, real records, real insurance. In a business sale, the buyer will do what's called due diligence, where they're looking through all of that. So I guess that's another, reason for me too. And that's not going to apply to everybody, but especially if you're like thinking about growing, scaling, and an exit someday, absolutely you want to separate, structure, to create a real business separate and apart from you that somebody's going to be able to look at down the road and hopefully be interested in.
Yeah, no, I think that definitely makes sense, and I think that's a great answer. So, well, we're already a little bit over time, and my apologies for the audience. We had a little bit of a technical issue. LinkedIn always has a bite of its own sometimes, and so we started a couple minutes late. But I do want to be judicious of the audience's time so that they can continue to build and grow their business. But I do want to wrap up. I always like to wrap up. I always say it's my favorite part, but really that's not true, because everything's my favorite part. It's kind of like choosing your favorite kid. There isn't a favorite kid, but I do love I always love to read. I love to listen to books, which is my form of reading, but I'm always on the hunt or always on the lookout to add the next great book to my book or podcast to my list of library to listen to. So the question I'd like to throw out to kind of wrap things up is, what's one of your favorite books or podcasts?
Yeah, so there's an author, his name is Morgan Housel, and he wrote a book called The Psychology of Money. And I have a finance undergrad, and I got a master's in tax, so I've always kind of been interested in that. He's a former Wall Street Journal reporter. It's just a really kind of interesting, fascinating book. I think that really helped me think about, money, other things differently, right? Just as the title would allude, right? The psychological element to it, and that, I think sometimes we try to get to like the strict right answer. And I think this applies to the law or finance or whatever. Like, here's what the algorithm says you should do, right? But really appreciating accounting for, okay, well, but we're all humans, and there's a psychological element to it too. So obviously this is talking about money, finance, and investing. I found it to be really fascinating, but I think it also has helped me honestly in my practice to think more about that as I'm advising clients is, hey, this might be the strict right, right legal answer for this person, but I don't want to discount kind of the psychological element and like what's going to help them sleep well at night and, not be up stressed about it, right? Because they're trying to squeeze every every last ounce out of something. So Psychology of Money,
Awesome.
Morgan Housel, enjoy that one a lot.
Awesome. Well, I'll definitely have to add that to the queue and encourage the audience to do so as well. So, well, now as we do wrap up, before we do, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Yeah, so my email would probably be best. Just Jacob, my first name, at dean.law. So pretty simple, straightforward. The website's dean.law, has some more information, but yeah, my email, jacob at dean.law. Easiest way.
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to reach out, support a great business, expand their network, and if nothing else, make a new best friend. So, well, thank you again, Jacob, for coming on Inventive Fireside, sharing some great expertise and chatting for one-on-one for a bit. As a quick reminder to the audience, we do these about once a week. So if you do want to register and get notifications on the upcoming or any given upcoming one, you can just go to my LinkedIn page and click on the events tab. Well, that will show everything that's up and coming, what the topics are, and who's presenting. And it's a great resource to make sure you can keep those in mind as they're coming up and are available. So thank you again, Jacob. Thank you for the audience for attending the Inventive Fireside, and wish everybody the best of luck on their journeys.
Thanks for having me.
Around the flame where the sparks ignite, dreams take flight in the amber light. A circle of minds, a fire of thought, building some from what we've got. Grab a log, throw it on. The night is young. The night is young. Welcome to the Inventive Fireside, where wisdom burns and hopes collide. Pull up a chair, let's fan the flame. Together we'll light up the game. The crackling wood, it tells a tale. Lessons learned and ships that sail. Experts speak and the sparks cascade, fueling dreams that will never fade. Bring your spark, your ember bright. Let's stoke the blaze through the endless night. Inventive Fireside, where wisdom burns and hopes collide. Pull up a chair, let's fan the flame. Together we'll light up the game. Hey, hey. Hi. flame where the sparks ignite. Dreams take flight in the amber light. A circle of minds, a fire of thought, building some from what we've got. Grab a log, throw it on. The night is young. The night is young. Welcome to the inventive fireside, where wisdom burns and hopes collide. Pull up a chair, let's fan the flame. Together we'll light up the game. The crackling wood, it tells a tale of lessons learned and ships that sail. Experts speak and the sparks cascade, fueling dreams that will never fade. Bring your spark, your ember bright. Let's stoke the blaze through the endless night. Inventive fireside, where wisdom burns and hopes collide. Pull up a chair, let's fan the flame. Together we'll